Hi, I'm Corinne. I'm going to be presenting my cultural identity project. I'm going to be talking about two different models that I feel like I relate to the most, and I'm going to be talking also about some of the limitations and benefits in using those, and how that might affect your relationships with your clients. So before I start on the models, I do want to share with you guys how I identify myself. So I'm biracial, but if someone asked me how I'd identify myself, I'd answer with black. My family's from Omaha, Nebraska, which is a pretty segregated city, and I was in the black part of the city going to an all-black school. I never felt like I was different. I had a lot of friends, and I felt really confident in my community. I grew up with relationships with both sides of my family, and that exposed me to a lot of different cultures growing up. I also identify as bisexual, but I'll talk more about that later. So the first status of Helm's people of color identity model is going to be dissonance. That is confusion about your own connection to people of color and to white people. Information related to race is often suppressed. So it's when you start to question things. For me, when I was in fourth grade, I moved to Minnesota to a predominantly white school and community. And all of a sudden, I was treated really differently. So I went from black community, black school to white community and white school. I was called racial names like monkey, and that's when I really started to question where I fit in. I permanently straightened my hair, and I was super desperate to fit in, but it felt like no matter what I did, I was never really accepted there. And I ended up making friends, but they were the only other two black kids that were in my school. And we kind of hung out separately from everyone else. Um, the second stage is immersion. So people of color idealize their own racial group while devaluing what is perceived to be white while expressing resistance to oppressive external forces. So this is where one embraces pride in one's culture. For myself, I grew up with a black parent in the house, and my friends had black parents. So I, again, was surrounded with a culture that I was comfortable with already, and it felt like I fit in. I think this status was the longest process for me, as it lasted from when I was in about ninth grade to my early 20s. Something else that might come out during this process is healing through community, which is seeking out spaces where my culture is celebrated. So for me, this looked like obtaining a minor degree in Black Studies, living in an all-Black community. Again, I moved back to Nebraska, and putting my son in a school called Nelson Mandela, which was built around celebrating Black culture. The third status is going to be internalization. So this is identified as the ability to use internal criteria for self-definition, as well as responding objectively to white people. So for me, this felt more like acceptance, that I don't need to choose a side, and being more accepting of all parts of me that make me me. One significant event that really sticks out to me is when I did the big chop at 24, which is cutting off all of my chemically treated, heat damaged hair because I'd been straightening it for so long to fit in, and allowed it to regrow and take its natural form. That was a huge moment where I felt like I had the most self-acceptance, and I decided who I am and who I want to be. The fourth status is going to be integrative awareness. That includes an assessment of one's intersecting identities and the recognition and appreciation of the similarities among oppressed people. It's also been described as the ability to be your authentic self in all spaces. So not feeling the need to code switch, and my sense of worth or identity isn't dependent on validation from outside sources, so other people or anything like that. For me, I now choose to see my experience with different cultures as a strength that allows me to connect with all different kinds of people. So the second model I'm going to be going over is the Weinberg-Williamson-Pryor model. This also has 4 stages, the first one being initial confusion. So this is when someone recognizes that they're sexually attracted to the same gender, but they might not really know what that means. So for me, I can pinpoint this back to 8th grade. There was a girl in my school who identified as a lesbian, and she would give me a lot of extra attention in the hallways, in between classes, and I knew it made me nervous. I knew I liked the attention, but it didn't occur to me that at the time that it was a crush. Now looking back, I know that's what it was, but at the time it never occurred to me. The second stage is finding and applying a label. So this is when someone would explore what it means to be bisexual and maybe receive support from other bisexuals. So for me, when I was 18, I began hanging around more queer identifying people. The third stage is settling into the identity. So people accept themselves and care less about what other people think. For me, this also happened when I was 18. I got my first girlfriend, and I didn't really care what anyone thought about it. And then the fourth one was continued uncertainty. So this is where people identify as bisexual with continued uncertainty about that label. So this stage surprised me because although I do identify as bisexual, I often do feel uncertain about it. So I think it's important to acknowledge that bisexuality can be fluid, situational, and can cause doubt, and all of those feelings are normal. So for me, I was married to a woman for 7 years, and I never was interested in men from ages 18 to 25. During that time, if you asked me, I would say I was a lesbian. And after I got a divorce, I became more open to dating men, and that caused me to question my identity. I eventually accepted that I am bisexual and that it's fluid, and everything I experienced in that process was normal and okay. Limitations of using identity models. So the first one is you can't assume someone's model. So I mentioned how I'm biracial. So you'd probably assume I'd identify more with the biracial model, but I didn't. Everyone's experience is different, and that might affect which models they'd most align with. Missing stages. A good example of this one would be how there was a long period in my life where I identified as a lesbian. The bisexual identity model didn't have a stage of that because not many people might have experienced what I did. Lacking consideration of intersectionality, so these models don't leave much space for how being of different cultures might affect someone's sexual identity models, or how being of a minority sexual identity might affect someone's cultural development model. This can cause huge differences in how someone's development occurs. And then I included a quote: adolescents and young adults develop a sense of self during a phase of life that involves many role changes. These salient transitional periods, such as entering tertiary education, initiating intimate relationships, and joining the workforce, may form an important context that increases the salience in identity processes and may go hand in hand with identity change. And I included that quote because it really sheds light on many of the transitional periods that might affect the speed and time period someone goes through different stages of their identity development. So a counselor might need to revisit these conversations during periods of big change. And then how my identity development model might influence psychotherapy I provide. Um, I mentioned over-identification bias. So something that could happen is that I might consider my own experience to be normal in some aspects and expect that others might feel that way too. And that could prevent me from digging deeper on certain things that I should. Privileged blind spots. So if I hold privilege in certain areas, that could result in me underestimating barriers that other people might be experiencing. And distance bias. So for clients who might have very different identities than mine, I could over intellectualize their experiences or might not dig deeper into certain issues, not realizing that they have more depth there. So our book tells us that multicultural counseling is the integration of culture identities within the counseling session, while social justice counseling refers to counseling that recognizes the impact of oppression, privilege, and discrimination on the mental health of individuals. Characteristics of my cultural history that give me power and privilege. I mentioned citizenship because I was fortunate to be born to two U.S. citizens. Language because I learned English as a first language. Education because I have the opportunity to attend school and access finances that allow me to continue to further my education. And then different values that I attribute to my cultural history are independence. I was raised to stand on my own, take care of myself. Education, it's been stressed to me since I was young. Adaptability, because I think being biracial has taught me how to adapt between different cultural worlds. And advocacy, because experiences of inequality and prejudice have encouraged me to want to speak out and make changes where and when I can. Characteristics of my cultural history that contribute to an inability to access power and privilege. Being a person of color, my socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and past traumas I've experienced, I think contribute to an inability to access power and privilege in those areas. And then skills and growth areas that can enhance counseling with diverse populations, self-awareness, actively learning about other cultures, using inclusive and affirmative language, and being aware of intersectionality in different people. Influences of my own positionality. So starting with cultural humility, I know what it feels like to benefit from privilege and experience bias, which has taught me that I can't just assume I know someone else's story. That's helped me to stay curious and non-judgmental. And to continue growing in this area, I plan to practice checking any assumptions I do have about someone's lived experiences and digging deeper when I need to. Cultural opportunities. Clients feel more at ease with me because they can sense that we have some similar lived experiences, and that gives me a lot of opportunity to show inclusivity and understanding. I can continue to grow in this area by making sure I'm letting the client lead with their own experiences and not just centering my own. Cultural comfort. I could feel more at ease working with minority clients because we do have some similar lived experiences, but I might not be as comfortable in spaces where privilege is concentrated. I can continue to grow in this area by learning to sit in my own discomfort and addressing any feelings that might come up for me, and figuring out where those are coming from. So before I wrap up, I had an additional quote I wanted to share. So the structure of self-identity is not a simple set or the sum of social roles, but they're a mutually mediated unity wherein integral elements and a certain hierarchy of social roles can be distinguished. This internal organization is precisely what makes the complex of social roles a personal integral unity. This quote stuck out to me because it explains that identity isn't just a collection of separate roles we play in life, but how those roles connect with each other and form a unified sense of self. It's that integration that creates our personal identity. Thank you.